So let's talk about workforce enablement. It's kind of the one thing I think everybody has in common consistently. It's the place, of course, where many of you have deployed or at least looked at good. Let's go into some detail here. Fundamentally, we have to get beyond the idea that just a few people are anointed with a device in business. It's not uncommon to see 10% of the workforce qualifying for an enterprise liable type device. And why would you do that when over 80% of the population that makes over 70,000 in the US has a smartphone? Over 80% of 18 to 24-year-olds have a smartphone. So why would you not try to leverage that as a platform as much as you possibly can if you can keep your data and your applications secure? It's a different way of thinking. But now what? Lots of possibilities. Anybody in the workforce, including blue-collar workers, they could check in on a job site, they could get their crew schedules, they can take training, do all kinds of new things when I don't have to worry about supplying them the device. This is a Kronos app, for example, does punch lists and timekeeping and so forth for construction workers. I think we're going to see a lot more of this trickling down deeper into the workforce. There will still be purpose-built devices that are totally locked down. We're not saying every device is going to do every function for everybody. There's still going to be a need for proprietary or, as we talked before, for industrial-grade devices, either handheld or head-mounted and so forth. But there is this interesting mix that's going on. You see this happening with airlines and electronic flight bags. That's a pretty sensitive bit of information, right? But you do find some airlines that have gone, believe it or not, BYO. They're very specific about which models you can choose. The only ones in the US that are currently certified are either iOS devices or Windows devices. But in the main, these tend to be corporate or airline-issued devices at the same time that the pilot bids on crew schedules and routes and takes training and so forth on their personal device. So it's a mix of both. And as we look at enterprises that have a BYO policy, that's about 60% of medium to very large organizations have some sort of BYO policy. That's interesting, but what's really interesting is how many employees qualify. In other words, how many people can I reach in the workforce? And we're going to hit a key inflection point around 2017, where about half the workforce is eligible for BYO device, and a smaller minority is eligible for enterprise liable devices. And you can see the numbers continue off. We didn't get to the specifics, but two of the organizations you saw this morning, Avi and Ed, represented organizations that had gone all BYO. In the case of Ed's organization, they were mandatory BYO. If you wanted a device, they'd pay you, but you were expected to bring your own device to work. Sometimes you see employee resistance, but that is certainly the trend that we see in the market, is more toward more employees carrying their own device for a wider variety of things. So there you can do really simple things. Just to start with the really simple stuff. This is not strategic to anybody, but just being able to take a picture of your travel receipts and send them back into your accounts payable group. You can cut weeks out of the reimbursement process, make the employee happier, and make the CFO happier. Again, not strategic, but you have enough traveling employees. There's actually a pretty big multiplier on it. It's got a good payback. So it's BYOD and it's employer provided for most organizations. There's kind of a bell curve. 15% of organizations we believe will never do BYO in any form, totally ban it. 15, maybe 20%. A set will be, all BYO, but most people are going to be right in the middle of that bell curve, supporting both at some level. If they're not doing BYOD, we see this rise of, some call it a choose your own device type of phenomenon. In other words, we can't really tell employees exactly what to use because they want some say, some type of choice in the matter, even if you're not doing bring your own. So the big payoff, and we heard from Steve with TIA-CREF in the panel this morning. He had a number of examples. They've done 19 applications now. The examples did sort of center into these buckets: improving the quality of data, getting it faster, reducing the cycle time, re-engineering processes. You can take a lot of steps out of processes with mobile just by starting from a mobile-first kind of thinking. And ultimately, again, in some jobs, we do expect that mobility is going to improve the safety of workers and better equip them for their jobs. This is kind of an interesting one. I've revealed who the customer is. This is okay. This is publicly available information. These folks inspect aircraft. Very important job. Historically, they've put stuff up on the web, and they issued to their workforce, they issued, industrial books, not just regular PCs. Nobody's getting a MacBook Air here. It's a tough book. It's 6 pounds of steel, forged metal, whatever it's made out of. Big, heavy thing. And they had one crew that wasn't taking it out. There were no, there was actually a crew run by an older guy, grayer than I am. And he said, and so they asked this guy, what are you doing? I don't see you with a clipboard or whatever. And so, okay, smart guy, what are you doing? And he says, well, what I do is I have an iPhone or whatever device he had. I found this app in the App Store, and I can take a picture of the IN number, and it does image recognition on that IN number, and it's mashed up against that database that the agency has that's publicly available data. He takes that back, and all of his forms are filled in. Isn't that amazing? I mean, the fact that it came out of the field, for one thing, and out of people they didn't expect, really, kind of these older inspectors, and the fact that it was consumer-driven, it tells you really, I think, innovation can come from anywhere in the mobile space, right? So I want to talk a bit about platforms, because we do, as an industry, we love, is the iPhone up? Is the Samsung device up? Is BlackBerry up or down or flat, et cetera. So I want to talk about platforms for a moment and give you our projections on where we see the device platform side going. First off, when we look at what's installed, what will be installed, not what's shipping into the market, but what's actually installed and going to stay there, in 2014 through 2017, you can see here the blue line that's relatively flat, the blue columns, is the PC world. You might be interested to know half of those PCs are also mobile. So they're laptops and ultra-mobile devices, et cetera. They're laptops and mobile PCs. Ultra-mobiles, tablets, and ultra-light PCs like the MacBook Air, like the Surface 3. Those are in the red, and they're growing. Doesn't look like a lot, but they serve a really important function. Very often, people are leaving the laptop back in the office or in the hotel or at home, and they're out in the field with the tablet and their smartphone. So it's what they spend more time with. And then the big green stuff is smartphones. If I add up what's mobile in all of that, that's about 81% of all devices. Now, we've had a pretty mature PC management model. The management model, of course, for these ultra-lightweight devices is different. Over time, those may converge a bit, but we don't think you can really manage these ultra-lightweight devices today in the same way that you do PCs. You certainly can't secure them in the same way that you did with PCs. So massive shift, mostly Android and iOS. In our projections, our surveys, CIOs and people who are planning this tell us that if they're thinking Android, they're about 60% likely to be Samsung. People do react well to the Samsung model, but point is, there's no Wintel event that's going to happen in this market. We're not going to have 90% dominated by one software and hardware vendor. It's going to be multi-vendor. It's going to be multi-form factor. This is a view of again, the predicted install base by OS. This is not just for enterprise, by the way, but this is across the consumer space too. And you can see No big surprise here. I think Android dominates, followed by iOS. A lot of Windows PCs. Big success for Windows for tablets and smartphones. We think might be 15 or 20% share. This is obviously why they're moving in the direction of things like Office for the iPad. What people are finding is when they do something like Office for the iPad is it has implications. It might tie you to, surprise, surprise, a Microsoft Cloud solution with OneDrive for Business. So be ready for those secondary sort of maybe unintended effects of that change. So IT really isn't going to dictate devices. It's the user's choice now, right? So what do? How do you protect your data? As we were talking earlier in the panel, the platform in the future isn't the device manufacturer. The platform is a set of software and services, often in the cloud, however you want to define cloud, that is the platform that does security and application delivery and so forth. The policy management side of this really, really matters. Gartner creates BYOD policies and corporate policies, kind of toolkits that people use all the time. But that's just a start. Really what you do in order to manage the device, manage the application, and so forth. But let's be clear. I mean, there are a lot of vendors that just sort of do that much. And that basic mobile device management sort of policy stuff is largely commoditized. A lot of big players in the market. You've seen acquisitions and consolidation, because that's not really where the value is going to be. We think isolation is going to be key. Several different ways to do isolation. A couple hypervisor models that a couple vendors might embrace. Unlikely Apple will ever embrace such a model, but who knows? They're a classically opaque organization. How many of you guys are staying in the hotel, right, here? Every one of those radios we have by our nightstand has got that 30-pin connector. That is like the 8-track tape of our era. We're going to look at that and go, what did that connect to? Imagine if you were BMW. Now, this is a true story. BMW had rolled out, all their docks for their, really impressive high-end cars, all the automation and so forth. 30-pin connector there, and a year later, here comes the Lightning connector, and they've got to put this little dongle on it. BMW wasn't terribly happy about it. So again, we're dealing with a lot of at least one dominant player that is really oblique and opaque. They do a lot of good stuff. I don't want to ding Apple too much. The stuff in iOS 8 looks pretty good. But again, however we're going to do it, containers are going to matter. Isolation is going to be the key. Think about, again, part-time and seasonal workers, or doctors that go from hospital to hospital, or anybody who has to sit under multiple policy management systems. And if you got your policy you want to manage and the folks that they work for at night have got a different policy management, who wins? What a mess. So the answer here, we believe in those situations, is some sort of containerization solution that isolates not only business from personal, but perhaps multiple business entities from others. Usability really matters here too. Apple has proven this to it. I think Apple also proved that usability isn't just about making it look pretty. I mean, they do lead with a lot of, their industrial design is amazing, their software is good, but they proved, I think, that usability is what makes it work in a mobile context. They eliminate steps, they understand the user's intent, they understand kind of contextually. Do they write the best apps in every instance? I've suffered through iOS Calendar for many years now. It is not the best application for calendaring. You can find Fantastical, you can find a lot of others that other people prefer to use, because just because it's native does not mean it is better. Just because it's containerized doesn't mean it's got to have a poor user interface. It doesn't. So we can't necessarily judge based on the past. Apple recently, just in the announcements this week, decided, well, maybe after all their keyboard wasn't the best keyboard. And now they're giving us multiple options, swipe and other sort of keyboards that we can use. That'll open up some interesting security concerns as well, because that's a really great vector to see what a user's typing. But usability really matters. If we keep badgering the user to re-authenticate every time they go back into an app, if every individual app has to have its own authentication systems, users will simply reject it. We've seen this time and again. So we can install too many barriers to get people done. We can put people in jail. When you put people in jail, they get really creative about breaking out. We learned this with corporate email systems. If you tighten things down too much, people figure out ways to shoot it all out into Gmail. They just get creative. So working with a user and giving them a way to do what they need to do that's a more secure substitute is certainly the way to go. More secure file share and sync, more secure applications. Yes, they'll have a choice over which, whether they use Dropbox or somebody else's secure sharing system, but at least give them the option and put it into policy. So think beyond mobile email for executives, because the world has really changed. It indeed has been disrupted. Think beyond simple devices, because the platform is a set of software and services in the cloud, however you define that. Separate. We think this is a key best practice. People want to roll out a mobile strategy. And we heard a bit about this from the panel, too, today, at least in the briefings we did. I'm not sure if it made it on the stage. But the whole idea is, sometimes you have to kind of get out a little bit ahead of your users and think about what it is that they're going to need in the future, because they may not be telling you. This is a long-standing issue with IT. So have a vision. But again, separate it by business to consumer. If you're in a consumer space, working with your marketing department, identifying what they're doing, not shutting it down, but working with them, becoming the clearinghouse. I think somebody said Renaissance IT today. It's a sort of a good phenomenon, Steve. Business to employee, that's a different set of concerns. I got a little more control. I don't have all control, but I got a little more. And B2B, when, and some people wonder, if somebody who's down my supply chain, should I treat them like a consumer? But they're a little bit captive. An insurance agent who's able to go, who's an affiliate, how much do I own them? There's some in between. So in your center of excellence, sort of separating these concerns, so it's not all one mobile strategy. Somebody told me, speaking of strategy like this, that you, by the time you know all the details, if you knew the specifics of your strategy, of your roadmap, you'd already be there. So there's a great deal of kind of uncertainty with some of these. I think we heard from Steve as well that there's a lot of new apps that they were working on. Sometimes they didn't even have ROI for it, but they knew they had to push ahead because this is the platform for the future. So build those mobile centers of excellence. These are multidisciplinary working groups. A key thing that Avi this morning, I don't think he said it on the stage again, but what Avi did to build his policy is he involved legal and risk and kind of put them in the driver's seat for their global mobile and BYOD policy, because a lot of these decisions sit outside of IT. Privacy concerns, work council concerns, tax implications about the way you reimburse people, et cetera. Don't do it alone, but bring people together and be more inclusive. You can then have working teams that deal with management and operations and security and the technology side. You'll probably have a separate working team that deals with application development, because now, in a multi-platform world, we may have to figure out, how do I write code once, write my business logic once, and have it go out to 3 or maybe 4 different platforms? So create the 3-year vision. You can articulate a full day in the life of a customer, of an employee. What is that going to look like 3 years from now? You don't even have to talk about technology in these visions. The pharma guys are really good at doing this. They will paint a picture. Here's what a sales rep for pharma, what their job looks like in 3 years, and then they gradually get technology to sort of fill into that. But they use that vision to get funding and get people excited about what you're doing. A lot of different Gartner research. I'm 30-second commercial. Largest IT research company on the planet. A lot of work on strategy, including a mobile device policy template. A lot of stuff on technology, a new mobile application development platform, Magic Quadrant coming out, a new mobile device management Magic Quadrant, and enterprise file share and sync. It's a rapidly moving space. And I hope it didn't disrupt you too much. Thank you for listening to me. Have a great afternoon. Thank you.